Hello everyone, welcome to Study Vibes Academy. This is the second part of breathing and exchange of gases. Alveoli are the primary sites of exchange of gases. Exchange of gases also occur between blood and tissues. Oxygen and CO2 are exchanged in these sites by simple diffusion, mainly based on pressure, concentration gradient. Solubility of the gases as well as the thickness of the membranes involved in diffusion are also some important factors that can affect the rate of diffusion. Next para is pressure contributed by an individual gas in a mixture of gases is called partial pressure and is represented as PO2 for oxygen and PCO2 for carbon dioxide. Partial pressure of these two gases in the atmospheric air and the two sites of diffusion are given in table and in figure. The data given in the table clearly indicates a concentration gradient for oxygen from alveoli to blood and blood to tissues. Okay, a gradient is present for CO2 in the opposite direction, that is from tissues to blood and blood to alveoli. As the solubility of CO2 is 20 to 25 times higher than that of oxygen, the amount of CO2 that can diffuse through the diffusion membrane per unit difference in partial pressure is much higher compared to that of oxygen. The diffusion membrane is made up of three major layers, namely the thin squamous epithelium of alveoli, the endothelium of alveolar capillaries, and the basement substance. Composed of a thin basement membrane supporting the squamous epithelium and the basement membrane surrounding the single layer endothelium cells of capillaries in between them. However, its total thickness is much less than a millimeter. That is an important line. Therefore, all the factors in our body are favorable for diffusion of oxygen from alveoli to tissues and that of CO2 from tissues to alveoli. Transport of gases. Blood is the medium of transport for oxygen and CO2. About 97% of oxygen is transported by RBCs in the blood. The remaining 3% of oxygen is carried in a dissolved state through the plasma. Nearly 20 to 25% of CO2 is transported by RBCs, whereas 70% of it is carried as bicarbonate. About 7% of CO2 is carried in dissolved state through plasma. Next heading is transport of oxygen. Hemoglobin is a red colored iron containing pigment present in the RBCs. Oxygen can bind with hemoglobin in a reversible manner to form oxyhemoglobin. Each hemoglobin molecule can carry a maximum of 4 molecules of oxygen. Binding of oxygen with hemoglobin is primarily related to partial pressure of oxygen. Partial pressure of CO2, hydrogen ion concentration and temperatures are the other factors which can interfere with this binding. A sigmoid curve is obtained when percentage saturation of hemoglobin with oxygen is plotted against the PO2. The curve is called the oxygen dissociation curve and is highly useful in studying the effect of factors like PCO2, hydrogen ion concentration, etc. On binding of oxygen with hemoglobin, in the alveoli where there is high PO2, low PCO2, lesser hydrogen ion concentration and lower temperature, the factors are all favorable for the formation of oxyhemoglobin. Whereas in the tissues where low PO2, high PCO2, high hydrogen ion concentration and higher temperature exist, the conditions are favorable for dissociation of oxygen from the oxyhemoglobin. This clearly indicates that oxygen gets bound to hemoglobin in the lung surface and gets dissociated at the tissues. Every 100 ml of oxygenated blood can deliver around 5 ml of oxygen to the tissues. under normal physiological conditions. Now, next heading is transport of carbon dioxide. CO2 is carried by hemoglobin as carbaminohemoglobin, about 20 to 25%. This binding is related to the partial pressure of CO2. PO2 is a major factor which could affect this binding. When PCO2 is high and PO2 is low, as in the tissues, more binding of carbon dioxide occurs, whereas when the PCO2 is low and PO2 is high, as in the alveoli, dissociation of CO2 from carbaminohemoglobin takes place. That is, CO2 which is bound to hemoglobin from the tissues is delivered at the alveoli. RBC contain a very high concentration of the enzyme carbonic anhydrase, and minute quantities of the same is present in the plasma too. This enzyme facilitates the following reaction in both directions. CO2 plus H2O in the presence of carbonic anhydrase is formed H2CO3. At the tissue site where partial pressure of CO2 is high due to catabolism, CO2 diffuses into blood, RBCs and plasma, and forms bicarbonate ion, that is HCO3 minus and H plus. At the alveolar site where PCO2 is low, the reaction proceeds in the opposite direction, leading to the formation of CO2 and H2O. This CO2 trapped as bicarbonate at the tissue level and transported to the alveoli is released out as CO2. Every 100 ml of deoxygenated blood delivers approximately 4 ml of CO2 to the alveoli. Next heading is regulation of respiration. Human beings have a significant ability to maintain and moderate the respiratory rhythm to suit the demands of the body tissues. This is done by the neural system, a specialized center present in the medulla region of the brain called respiratory rhythm center is primarily responsible for this regulation. Another center present in the pons region of the brain called pneumotaxic center can moderate the functions of the respiratory rhythm center. Neural signal from this center can reduce the duration of inspiration and thereby alter the respiratory rate. A chemosensitive area is situated adjacent to the rhythm center, which is highly sensitive to CO2 and hydrogen ions. Increase in these substances can activate the center, which in turn can signal the rhythm center to make necessary adjustments in the respiratory process, by which these substances can be eliminated. Receptors associated with aortic arch and carotid artery also can recognize changes in CO2 and hydrogen ion concentration and send necessary signals to the rhythm center for remedial actions. The role of oxygen in the regulation of respiratory rhythm is quite insignificant. Disorders of respiratory system. Asthma is a difficulty in breathing causing wheezing due to inflammation of bronchi and bronchioles. Emphysema is a chronic disorder in which alveolar walls are damaged, due to which respiratory surface is decreased. One of the major causes of this is cigarette smoking. Occupational respiratory disorders. In certain industries, especially those involving grinding or stone breaking, so much dust is produced that the defense mechanism of body cannot fully cope with the situation. Long exposure can give rise to inflammation leading to fibrosis, that is proliferation of fibrous tissue, and this causing serious lung damage. Workers in such industries should wear protective masks. Okay, students, so this chapter is over now. Thank you so much. Thanks for watching.